Hi guys, in this video I'm going to be doing a study of this image from Unsplash and I'm going to see how much I can get done in maybe about an hour or so. Let's just do until 11:30. So I've got an hour and 10 minutes to study this drawing and you get to see my process with this. I'm using something called Clip Studio and I'm using PureRef. Both are relatively cheap or free. Clip Studio is not expensive and PureRef is free. You can also donate. PureRef lets you put an image inside this little reference zone and you can zoom in and place it over the application that you're working. If it does disappear when you click on the application, just make sure you set it to the window to always be on top. So you can do mode always on top and it will always be on top. So I'm just going to move this to a place. Once I've set up a canvas, I'll move it to a place that I'm not working in. So I'm just going to go new and let's just go for maybe something a bit more height, 100. That looks kind of good enough. So not the massive resolution because I want to get nice performance from it, but 1800 by 1200 is kind of close to HD resolution. So we'll go with that, and now if I want I can just move this across a bit and down the bit there, and I'll just make this a bit smaller. Right, so looking at this image, I'm looking for the key things that's going to help me place everything. And if you're new to drawing, you might draw the first thing that attracts you and you might draw it too big, like this train, and therefore everything else falls out of scale. So it's important to lay down your lines and things like that first. So kind of make an estimate where things happen. So this is kind of halfway here, so that sign is exactly halfway. So halfway there's a sign here kind of going that direction. So I'll just do a little line for that, and that helps me to work out the bend of this track. So we've got the bit there, we've got the track going up, and you don't have to draw the full line. Don't try to, you know, do a full thick line like that. Just make one little curve and leave it, and you can fix it up later. If like me using digital, then that's a lot more forgiving because you can just do an undo. Okay, just looking at the halfway point of the picture is here, which kind of is where the top of the train is, and you can see like roughly halfway down this shadow of the train. So halfway here, so we got the top of the train roughly there, and almost the same thickness of the train as a bit of a distance, something like that. Looking at halfway down the picture, that's where the sign is. I can now use that kind of distance, so it's a little bit thicker than the train. So now I'm thinking the train is probably about here somewhere, something like that. And then it's got the bottom bit, and I can see the tracks go under it. And now this pathway is actually somewhere here with the shadow. Right, so none of this is like your final drawing. Just think of these as taking notes, visual notes that help you construct the full image. And you can always paint over these later and they'll kind of just disappear. If you're using pencil and paper, if you work very lightly, it means they're much easier to erase. If you lean very heavy and you try to erase it, you're probably going to be left with some indentation on the paper or some little marks that you really can't get rid of. So just be super light. A good tip is to hold the pencil a little bit further up from the bottom, and that means it's more like it's balancing on your fingers, and don't put as much pressure down. Okay, so another key thing in the picture is this tree. It kind of goes through like that, so we can kind of just do something like that. And there's a branch coming off it and going the other way somewhere around about halfway. crossing through, and it splits into two. You don't have to be super accurate. Trees are very organic, so you get away with a lot. But it's just good to take these little notes because they're nice and non-uniform. Okay, and we've got some foreground branches creeping through here as well. Alright, so a lot of it's in place. There's a gap between this sign and some fences, so I'm just going to introduce that little bit of fence there and the little post of it, and we see a bit of that. And then because of perspective, this other fence looks a little bit smaller and the gap is shorter. So a habit that you might have when you're new to drawing is you're going to look at similar things, and you might accidentally make this spacing the same as this. You tend to make these relationships with things, and that breaks your proportion. But just observe things and draw what you see, and kind of understand why this this gets smaller, because of the arc for one, and it's getting a little bit smaller in the distance as well. So there's these perspective lines that's making these shorten into the distance. Okay, you can kind of trace that up in some imaginary eye level somewhere here. So that gives you a kind of sense of the horizon line. Remember, all of this is just note taking. Don't worry too much about it. It's easy just to erase this if you've drawn very lightly. And if you're using digital, you can just undo to the point where you're happy. So, got this midline, we've got some trees coming off there. Now, if you feel you've got a lot of lines going around like me, and there's too many notes, and you maybe thought that was going to be a branch, then yeah, go ahead and just erase that out if it helps. Okay, and now if you're coming from Photoshop and using Clip Studio, it used to be that B would give you the brush. It does actually give you the brush, but there's also a pencil. So you press P for pencil, but it jumps between a pen and a pencil. So, and then B will give you the brush. So just remember that P is going to be a toggle between the pen and the pencil, and just keep an eye on what's happening there. You can always try and draw with it if you're a little bit lazy about looking over here or something, or you just want to keep your focus on the page more like that. Okay, so now I'm looking at the shape that we see of the sky, and there's not very much. This white area kind of gives us an idea of where the sky is. So now all of this is just a fill of texture and noise, and we kind of want to work from back to front and big to small, because you want to create those filled in areas that you can then layer on top of. If I start with just the train, and then I'm suddenly find myself with a big brush to fill in this hillside, there's a good chance I'm going to cover up some of that work by accident, unless I'm really clever and I use layers. But just imagine that you're painting on a single canvas or a single bit of paper, and you don't really have that scope of layers and things. So this is a good mid-ground. I'll try avoid layers as much as possible. Obviously, using digital, you've got that option. So for now, I'm just using one transparent layer on a white background, very much like paper, right? So if you are painting on like a white canvas, you might want to wash it where the majority of the area, like this, is maybe like a mid-brown or a mid-grey, and that way it's easier to add little highlights or lighter tones later. So once that's dry, you can then use like a lighter paint with a bit of white through it, a bit of yellow through it to do these. But it's all digital, so we get away with a lot more. But I'm going to go ahead and start thinking about that wash now. So I've got my line layer here, and maybe I want to keep that, and then just work on the paper and give it some tone. So I'll go for the brush here. I'm just gonna I think it doesn't like to paint on that, so I'll just do another layer. There we go. So I'll use this nice painterly style brush, and I'm going to put the opacity right down and go for some nice autumny browny red tone just to start filling in back part. Now you see this brush has got some weird edge to it. I don't think I like that for this purpose. It's showing too many overlapping lines. So I'm going to try, let's see, reduce that watercolor edge. Yeah, that's a bit better. And I think I can also change some other things like flow. But if not, there's a nice wet wash brush and that's going to do the job. So I'll use that, bring that right down. And it's got these interesting things like 2 particle density, 2 spray deviation. These things I'm not too familiar with right now, but what I'm familiar with is a good old color pick to get some tones. But you can see this is in multiply mode. I'm just going to change that to normal mode so it doesn't darken any tones underneath, because if you multiply like a half by a half, you basically have a quarter, which means it's darker, right? So yeah, I'll just lock in some tone here. Still got that drawing and that layer, and if you were painting, then you would be painting in sort of light tones like this. Okay, so I'm going to keep it nice and light. So the 3 key things to think about is working big to small, background to foreground, and also light to dark. It's probably the best method, I think. Like, you know, keep your paint fairly light and then get darker. So I'm going to try a few more of these other brushes. Watery brush. It's just, oh, that's just making water. Okay, let's carry on with that. And I'm going to idealize a few tones as well. Like the sky doesn't have a lot of blue in it, so I'm just going to introduce just a little bit of blue, just like that. And maybe just a little tone change towards the top. Right, should be enough for that area. Right, so don't think about all the detail that you're going to have to do and let that bog you down. You might as you develop this picture, you might stumble across a brush that's going to save some time. Like it's got a kind of randomness to it, and there is some options here for things like that, some sprays, and you could do things like that to help mix up some tones for the background, and it will just create a bit of texture. You make the brush smaller, things like that. But I'll just carry on building this up. Like there's a noise brush, and it can be fun to test some things just now because all of this is going to be covered up later. And you can always make tones lighter if they're too dark. Some interesting little marks and things here. So I'm just putting some greens down here that may change in tone and things, but they give me a base to work on. Some of these brushes are a little bit unpredictable from what I'm used to. They are trying to act a little bit more like real paint. Let's put that to normal mode. They all seem to want to be on that mode as well. So again, coming from Photoshop, I'm used to pressing the number keys to get opacity levels, but you have to do that here. Maybe someone's going to invent something that makes that more like Photoshop. Now this is quite a nice brush because it is more like watercolor. It's a rough wash one. I quite like this, and you see I'm idealizing all these tones down here, and I'm just thinking of the ground in a minute. So think of this as the background for the trees, because the trees will be the foreground, and then in front of the trees is the fence. So I'm kind of working behind these trees here and making some interesting green tones and picking out dark tones. Now I'm spending a lot of time looking at the reference, and I'm kind of building all this up a little bit blindly, so I'll just do my best to make it look good. I really like this brush though. It is looking very watercolorish. So far we're just 10 minutes or so in, and I'm going to a little bit of the brown track there. Very interesting brush. Now, I'm still to get used to the brushes with this tool, and I would like to be able to customize some because they seem quite powerful. I think the algorithm they've got for the brush strokes is a bit more powerful than Photoshop's, and the results are really nice. So I will be happily using this moving forward. But Photoshop's a really good option. There's a lot of brushes out there that artists will make, and yeah, they're really good for getting you good results quickly. So I'm kind of working around this train here. I should really put in some marks for the top of this bit here as well, so I'm just going to throw that in and figure out where this distance is. So I'm just comparing this distance from the edge. So there's the edge of the train there. Right, it can be a little bit heavy with this now that I'm a bit further ahead, and I want to be able to see through it. And this layer is just the sketch layer. I'll just turn it off and on again. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can idealize it to your style. You're going to make your own mistakes, which is going to make it unique anyway, so you've got that excuse that anything you do will be yours, good or bad. And there's really only you that's going to call it a mistake anyway, and other people will look at it and they'll see it as a whole picture without thinking about the small things where you didn't get it perfect. But yeah, what is perfect anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Just, you know, you can get away with a lot of things. Right, now I'm trying to keep the brush the same size, quite big, so that I'm definitely going to be avoiding detail. And anyway, this brush has got a nice little kind of texture to it that's already giving me some inherent detail, but I do want to keep the brush biggish while I work on these tones and shapes that I see. Again, it's all kind of loose and free, and you don't have to be super accurate with it. A couple of things to notice is the level of contrast in the foreground pieces is higher than the background ones, and you can imagine that's because of lots of little flies and dust particles building up and creating this kind of layer, which kind of lightens this background area a bit more. So that's just something to be mindful of. I'm looking at the direction of these little bits here because I want to work on stuff over that there. If I wanted, I could go ahead and make another layer for that, but I want to make it feel like I'm on a single canvas and I can paint over things when the paint's dry. And the good thing about digital is there is no paint drying, it just does it as soon as you've made a stroke. So I'm just looking at the other brush options, if there is any. Again, I'm still new to these features, but there does seem to be brush shape, spraying effect. Yeah, all of this I've yet to uncover. So once I get good at this, I'll likely make some tutorial videos, but I really like Clip Studio for painting. There's other cool software out there like Coral Paint and Krita. That are good at pressure sensitivity. There's also Photopea if you don't have a Photoshop license, and you can always use Photopea. It's online and it's very similar to Photoshop, and it uses the pressure sensitivity as well. So I'm just doing this little highlight of this bit of shrub here. I just want to dot that in. I like to play with the opacity, because when the opacity is low, I keep some of that previous marks that I made, and I kind of mix it up and make it more interesting. I want to slowly bring this hue over, the saturation over to the right to get a little bit more vibrancy as well. I'm just constantly looking for these colours. I make the brush small now and again, just get different kind of dashes and stuff. So about 15 minutes left of this. I'm starting to get into the detail here as well, so I don't want to get too carried away with it. I think I want to get a bit lighter here. Now, if you want, you can try and colour pick from what you see, but it's a good idea to also train your eye to replicate, and you might end up with a little bit of an experimental mess in your paper, but I like to just call that happy accidents and kind of just some random stuff, really. Every time you layer it all up and use it in a nicer, a broader area, it's going to look fine. So yeah, this is also known as a plein air study, where you actually study some random landscape or scene like this, and you know, make what you can of it. Usually within a set time limit is a good idea. Give yourself a challenge. See how much you can get done in an hour and a half or 2 hours. I really like the way it goes from green to yellow to red here, so I'm going to try and mimic that right now. So some green. It isn't much darker green, but like I say, I'm trying to idealize and make it a little bit more vibrant. So let's make our way around to yellow and brighten up a bit there, around a bit more. And then it's making its way to some red tones, which I've already kind of put a little bit in. I'm just using a Wacom tablet, an Intuos Pro medium, and yeah, I've had this tablet for a long time. I don't like to use the Cintiq. I've got one and I have tried it a few times, but I like the freedom of not having your hand at an angle and upwards. I get quite a sore shoulder quite quickly. I like to have my hand out of the way while I do this kind of work. I'm going to pick some of these tones here because they're quite useful. So it's really nice that range of colour there. So I need to remember to kind of distribute that idea in different places, otherwise it might feel a bit isolated. So I've got some dark greens above. Strain here. You see, I'm really working a lot on this background. I want it to be somewhat detailed, that it looks interesting. And yeah, I kind of can't wait to do the train, but I'll leave the best to last. Okay, now we've got a bit of sunlight back here, which is lighting certain areas up. It's making all these nice tones, and I might go over that with like color dodge or something that adds the tones up. So, for example, if I switch this to color dodge and I paint, you see it's making these like nice lighter bits. So I think I'll do that at the end so that I can keep all this similar sort of tone for now, and then decide what I want to do later. Also use multiply. Multiply is kind of the opposite. It's going to darken things. So color dodge and multiply are good ones. You might also find dodge and burn or two modes. So there's burn ones here, color burn and linear burn. The best way to know what they do is just to try them with a few different things, and you'll eventually come back to them if you work out what the benefits are for you. There's a lot of kind of shadows across here as well, but I'm not too sure if I want that yet. And I've still got on multiply. Okay, that was a few mistakes. That's some mistakes that you would only be able to make digitally, because if you're using real paint, it's all in normal mode really. You don't have that option to multiply with the tones of pixels below or add to the value of the pixels below or anything like that. Okay, let's just make that a bit lighter there. Now I'm feeling that the sketch is a little bit in the way. I can either reduce the opacity a lot or just go with what I've got in my drawing now, and I think I'll just go with what I've got. I'm just going to completely ditch the sketch layer. I'm quite happy to work from the reference. So on that note, I'm going to make kind of medium brown just to start putting in that there. And you can see how the perspective is making the distance between each of these a little shorter. So that's important to don't, just make one and make the spaces the same. Take time to observe what's going on in terms of perspective. So I'm actually going to try that one more time. This is a little smaller, so it is kind of in a sketch form, but similar colour. Go like that. And I really like the way this brush feels. It kind of builds up a bit after you've done a stroke with it. Right, something like that, I'll be fine. Right, that one's a bit thicker because it's at the end. And they do drop down a bit, so they're all a bit thicker. Okay. And some interesting things happening behind here. There's a little kind of grey box and platform. So I put in some tones with a platform that I can mess around with later. Right, as soon as I put this train in, it should start to make some sort of sense. There's a weird disconnect that feels, it kind of feels like I could put a character here and you can jump down, be like here. Hey, come down, yay! It feels like that at the minute because of this perspective doesn't really have much to connect with, but you'll see that once I get the train in, it will make sense. So I'm going to put the train in to some degree now, like that. There's always something you have to do to make it work. I'll put that in there, and it's got this big bottom bit. And I guess it's where the wheels would sort of connect to the track, but it's all in kind of shade, and it casts shadow for this platform as well. So a good way to do shadows is to switch to multiply mode, or kind of wait till all your paint's dry and make a kind of dark blue tone and quite washed out. Just make sure I don't have too much opacity, don't want it to be too dark. That will also help when I add that in, it's going to help a bit. Right, and I can even put in like some shadows of some of the foliage things. It's nice, it feels quite watercolourish, this brush. With the watercolour edge, I think you can change this watercolour edge amount. That's really strong. I'm just going to put it right down. Right, so now I'm just going to fill this in a bit, just give it some sort of darker tone so I can get an impression of scale things. And there's a kind of gate back there, and fence, and a sign. You can see I've kind of just had to sketch that in again. I'm a little bit off in some places, but again it's very forgivable, this type of study. Right, and let's go. I'm going to leave this all kind of washed out because I want it to feel further away and it's all getting close to the sky, and you can see through these gaps that it is a bit lighter and washed out. I don't have to do too much. Maybe I'll just grab a little bit of a dark tone and just put some marks there just so they might come through. I can change that to normal again. Get a little bit of texture from that. Right, okay, so I want to kind of make the tones of this train, so I'm just going to go over the black. I don't want it to be a black outline because it is like a white edge. I'm just using the same brush. I really like this brush. And I'll just copy some of that tone there. Let's put some little dots of green. I'm going to wash that away. And then there's a kind of black border around the window where the graphics come in. I think it goes a bit lower. And you see some little vertical shapes inside there. Yeah, it's important that I put in the right tones, like this black tone doesn't exist in the painting, so I'm just going to make sure I highlight that edge better in a second. Also notice I don't like to zoom in too much to the painting because I'll be lost in a whole lot of noise. The only time I'd zoom in is probably at the very end to do some like detailing for something close up in the foreground. So I could probably put the stripe in there just to get a feel for how that looks. See, it kind of overlaps the window there. I'll just do the full stripe as if it was solid first, then I'll carve in the second grey line. Get a couple of tones, make it a little darker at the bottom. And then I'll just make that grey division. And there's a bit of information there. have to be too accurate with it. I can come back to it later, but I should really now balance the rest of the picture with a similar amount of detail and work involved. So just think of it as you're doing an equal amount of pass work on the whole piece. You can always come back to these things. Right, there's some shadowy bits there, and got a kind of gate here. I do have some yellow in here I should really do now before I put anything in front of it. It is quite a bright yellowy bit. It's the technical term, a bright yellowy bit. Right, I could probably highlight some of this orange as well. Get a feel for all those little branches. You notice I like to pick the colour first, then make a shift to it. You see that's starting to look quite nice up in this little thumbnail up here. And I'm not worried about being accurate. I'm calling it my own by putting my own little marks in here, and they're not by any means the same as the photo. So you're using your photo as a reference, then you're just making your own little decisions to make it yours. What's kind of important is try not to be too uniform with things and make loads of little brush strokes, but they're not a continuous line. They're just all random little deviations and marks. You kind of want to make them their own little things as well. Yeah, so I'm getting a little detailed, maybe a bit too carried away with that. So I just want to try to keep it subtle. You see I just hit the roof of the train there, so that's why it would have been important for me to maybe done a bit more detail in the background first, but I think that's gone well. Right, so I want to maybe bring in some of these sticks and things in the background because I don't want to have to try and fit these in later behind the foreground, so I'll do that now. So a nice small brush and just get some lines going up here. You see I've kept them quite a soft grey so they get pushed back because they're getting affected by all that mist and dust and flies and kind of a layer of tiny little wispy bits in the atmosphere. And that's also known as atmospheric perspective because the atmosphere is pushing things back as it gets more dense, like clouds, how they push distant mountains back just by creating some transparent layer in front. Try not to go over the same lines too much, the way I'm possibly showing you what not to do at the same time as telling you not to do it. Because you'll just spoil the look of that line. If you want to make something thicker, just make the brush slightly bigger, or use a thicker brush or a thicker pencil. There's not too many, I'll put a few here as well just to help break this up. There is a lot of coverage over here. There's even some little kind of lighter twigs and branches possibly catching the light, so they're not all just dark. And treat all these branches as individuals. Don't simply do loads of lines like that because the spacing ends up too uniform if you go too fast. You take your time with that sort of thing. Right, another thing I want to work on now is just to create a bit of tone this part to separate it a bit more from the other parts. More contrast up here as well because it's closer to you. It's not affected by those dust particles so much as the ones as they go further away. You're getting a little bit more layer of dust between you and it. You can line it up a little bit. So things coming towards you, get a little bit more contrast. Not things you think about every day when you look at objects, but it's definitely something you can think about the next time you observe something. I'm just going to pick out a little bit of details here. Right, so it's taken some shape. And I think I'll leave a lot of this shadow to later. Not too fussed about these lines just now, they might be too much detail. Let's get a picture and I'll just keep working on it. So yeah, I'm just going to idealise this little gate a little bit more. It's not exactly right to the photo, but I'm going to put it there and make it my own. And just try and get that one line in. If you do that line too many times, it's just going to look like too many lines that are wrong. So just try and get one. Let's put in this box here. Let's help a little. Some sort of signage here, but they're really flat. I'm just going to add those in really subtly like that. I like the way they catch the light. Okay, and then I think because this train's passing by and it's a lot longer, it's putting a lot of this in shadow, not just the bit of platform there, but this little fence here as well. And a few more little kind of green details here I want to kind of put in. And there's a tiny bit of gate. Yeah. It's a little further away. Okay. I often like to pick colours that are nearby, or, so that I keep a similar kind of tone. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I think there's a little bit of cabling here that goes up. I've never actually been to Japan or anything to see this, but I think there is some sort of line running through here, so I kind of want to introduce a sense of that perspective. Something like that, just very subtle. There's also a lot of lines here that I could throw in. Some are getting hit by the light, so you have little lighter ones and little darker bits, shadow and light, and that really helps. I just make them sort of go really subtly into the distance. Okay, good. I can work on the tracker a little bit more just to help give me the sense of this track moving around and shadowy bits. I'm going to switch this to multiply so that I kind of retain some of the tones underneath. I'm making an assumption here that there is some sort of slats. I don't want to zoom into it because I like the process that I'm using so far. I kind of suggest there's something going on here because of my will to idealize this whole image, I guess. And now I'm going to go back to normal and push this sign away from the edge a bit. It doesn't make sense it being so close there, so I need to reintroduce some little marks and things. I'm going to bring this sign up a bit. Like so, and yeah, a lot of this I'll just paint over for now. Kind of restoring it, and then I'll fix it in a second. So a nice little golden patch back there that's helping to differentiate between the background and foreground. So I'm going to bring that in. And there's a little bit at the side there that I quite like it because it's making me think that this train's fairly small and we can see the other end of this side. Yeah, that's all kind of over there somewhere. Okay. Looks like a windscreen wiper here and here. Just going to redefine. Oops. Oh, I've just ruined the rotation. Still not used to. Rotation. There we go. Where was I? Lost my train of thought, no pun intended. I was doing this, doing the white lines. Yeah, just bring the size down. And now I get a really detailed brush. Yeah, and you can hold down Shift to make that a straight line. Okay. It feels like the brush is too strong. So I'm going to make a few little marks here. Let's break that up. And maybe a bit more red around there. And definitely some more sort of twigs and things here. Cool. So this foreground is really going to help set this off. I want to bring this sign up higher, so the top of the sign is the bottom of this. Yeah, so much more up here. That'll be better, and nice and straight. Even though the track's going at a curve, the sign shouldn't have to follow it, so that's something that I was doing wrong there. Put some sort of a fill. But it's going to be a bit more solid tone wise because it's closer to us. So time wise, there's just over 18 minutes left. Will that be enough to get all these trees in? I need to speed up. And these are quite dark because they're in the shadow and they're in the foreground. Let's just put this sign in, kind of slapdash. I've gone to a different brush, I think. Yeah, I lost my original brush, but it's okay. It's a bit more kind of yellowish, creamy yellowish tones coming off this because the way it's bouncing the light around. I need to watch it, don't go too light with it. And I want to just define the edge a bit better. There's some right on there, arrow, little square, something. And something that way. Let's bring this fence up a bit. That's good, it's already half done for us. There. In a way, I've brought back the drawing on the top. Let's do that there. Boom, boom, boom. Highlights on that. Right, I'm going to start bringing in the trees now because I don't have a lot of time left. I've just got 16 minutes to get this foreground done. So we've got this big tree, let's make that stronger. Bring up the density a bit. It's a bit of a noisy brush. I've yet to figure out how to tweak the settings. I don't want to do it too bad to quite like it. Right, so we'll do that, and there's a few branches. There's a bit of red in there, probably coming from sun glare. So I'll just put some red in there as well, just to make it feel like that. And I can make a choice here to reduce the amount of branches that I see because I might not like how noisy all of that is. I don't have to draw absolutely everything that I see. And I can make up my own mind about what I see as well. So it's kind of up to you what you decide your final painting's going to look like based on this reference. A lot of shapes coming over that as well. You see, I like to change the tone every now and again so we get a bit of variety out of it. Right, so there's a lot of yellow in here, a lot of orange, and then it goes to this darky reddish brown. And that is going to be something that's going to help us layer all this up. I also want to do little highlights of some of these branches just to bring them forward a bit more. Make it feel like they've got a bit of sunlight hitting them. There's also a lot of branches and trees here in the background coming out. Really difficult to get this done in an hour and a half, and the time goes so fast. Right, let's go for some of this now. So I'm going to start with the yellows and come back over it. So a nice big noisy brush there as well. I'm trying to imitate what I see, the kind of left and right kind of flatness of this, and just putting in some marks. This will help to push all this back as well as this builds up contrast. Okay, shift this around a bit. It's a bit more vibrant as well. Just need to watch I don't overdo it. I need to break up that with a bit of leaving what's already there is important. I don't have to cover it all up. It's not a colouring in book, it's more like the art of knowing where to place these and how much, and not too much. Get a habit of overdoing it. I think most people might overdo it. I've got 12 minutes left, that's not bad. I should be able to get this looking decent. So I'm just at the orange bit, I'm working my way around the hues and making sure I cover a good bit of area. See, it's not one-to-one with the picture, and it's more of my interpretation, and that's what makes it unique, and that's the way all artists end up unique, because their interpretation can be quite pretty, and their methods of using pencils or pens or paints, digital pen or whatever. Right, okay. So now I'm going to go more deeper. This red. I'm really kind of looking for these leaves now in the reference and try my best to imitate some of that. This might have been the core. I don't want to change the brush size too big now. I'm going to try and keep it to this scale. And I think I do need more branches in this part because it's quite heavy with leaves. And it's quite a key part of this picture. Helps to direct the eye towards the train. It's almost like a giant arrow. There's a whole missing trunk down here as well, but yeah, I just need to see how much I can get done. There's 10 minutes left. That's why it's also good to set a time limit. It stops you doing too much. Just make that extra low opacity, just get some quick and easy density into that bit. Right, because I want to finish a few bits off. Let's just get rid of that mistake. I want to finish a few bits off with this fence because it could end up finished looking. And some shadow down here and fixing that old sketch. And now we're going to go kind of brownish, change this to multiply. I should really start to get in some of the shadow, help push everything around. Okay, and a few dark streaks in here. Again, it's going to get more frequent in the background to help perspective. I'll just make the brush smaller and smaller and make some shapes here. I'm going to make some nice branches. Really bring up the opacity. It's 8 minutes left. Not too much of a worry. You see how I'm now painting over those leaves? I should really paint more leaves over the top of them as well. Right, and then there's a whole lot of bits and things happening here. Let's jump back to normal. Let's quickly get some more things over those new branches that I made. Really get some golden things happening here now. It's just an impression of what's going on. It's not exact. You're not trying to make it turn yourself into. You're not trying to turn yourself into a digital camera. Your brain's absorbed all this information quite a lot now because you've been observing it, and I guess that's the important bit when you do studies. Not just about making an accurate painting, it's making the effort so that your visual library builds up, and the next time you make a drawing or something, you will likely make a pretty good looking Japanese train station. I want to go even brighter in some places. I do want to make some contrast, so I'm going to change this to linear color dodge, just kind of add even more interesting things to this. I'm just stippling away for the next 6 minutes, really, adding some interesting marks. Yep, yep. Let's just shift this hue around and see if we get different tones. Now with the additive mode, it's difficult to get away from this being so strong that it's just turning yellow. I think I found a sweet spot. There we go, we're kind of making these kind of nice reds that aren't really in the photograph, but they kind of are. It's just hard to work out how they're made. And you start to see it when you experiment with these kind of things. You start to come across happy accidents that work. 5 minutes left, and I do want to kind of highlight up some of the distance bit, so I'm just going to bring that opacity right down and just tapping around here to get a little bit of a highlight, to make this feel like it's catching a bit more light. It is more subtle because of that dust and atmosphere, but it will help. And also helping this a bit with more tones. I say I'm not really worried about all this detail. I think that will just make it a little too graphic-y design like. I want to fix a few bits here and there real quick, and maybe I I can quickly go to normal mode and fix a few of these branches. It's all at a risk now, but I can always undo it. Highlights here because some of the light of the leaves is breaking through and scattering down and hitting off the top of this sign and things. That will help sort of break it apart. In the sky, get a really small brush and just do some final little highlight work with the last 3 minutes. It's just something I like to do, it's just almost like you're just scratching it, you know, scratch some lines in there. And I just want to get a feel for the whole piece now and think, is there anything else that I need to do? And I think I'll just make the shadows a little stronger. So back to multiply, a little bit brownish, bring the brush size up and opacity and density down. Yeah, just really start to bring a bit of shadow back in here. Two minutes left. And yeah, I'm just going to do a little bit of blue up here. A bit more blue. Just to push it back. So blues tend to get pushed back more and you get the warmer colours coming forward. Nice little glow dodge, whatever that does. And it's like, now's not the time for experiment, but I think that worked quite well. Just do a little bit of red in there. Glow dodge. And yeah, I think I'm gonna call it done, so I'll just do a little signature on that. So back to pencil and just give it a little signature there. Yeah, so that is my study done, and yeah, quite happy with it. I think it looks good and nice. And yeah, thanks for watching this video.